The little girl had not taken a single step in 6 years, yet that afternoon, in front of hundreds of people, she suddenly pushed herself out of her wheelchair and ran straight into the arms of a stranger. Her billionaire mother froze so completely that the expensive glass she was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered across the marble floor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The doctors stared in disbelief. The security team reached instinctively for their radios. And the single father standing at the center of the chaos looked just as shocked as everyone else, because he had no idea why a child he had never met was running toward him as though she had been searching for him her entire life. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing stories that remind us that miracles sometimes arrive through the people we least expect. For 6 years, Vivienne Harcourt had built her life around protecting her daughter, Elara, from disappointment. Vivienne was one of the most powerful women in America, the founder of a technology empire worth billions, a woman whose name appeared on magazine covers and whose signature could move entire companies. Yet none of that mattered when she looked at her daughter sitting silently in a wheelchair every morning. Elara had been injured in a terrible highway accident when she was only 4 years old. The doctors had never promised a recovery. They had told Vivienne that her daughter might never walk independently again, and although rehabilitation had restored some movement, every attempt at standing had ended in pain, fear, and exhaustion. Over time, Elara stopped trying. Vivienne never blamed her. Instead, she quietly hired the best specialists money could find, built a private therapy center inside their estate, and transformed her daughter's world into a carefully protected bubble where almost nothing unexpected was allowed to happen. Vivienne's protection came from love, but love mixed with fear can become a prison without anyone realizing it. She had lost Elara's father years earlier, not to death but to abandonment. He had walked away when the medical bills became overwhelming, leaving Vivienne to carry the emotional burden alone. From that day forward, she had convinced herself that depending on anyone was dangerous. She trusted accountants, attorneys, doctors, pilots, and security professionals, but she rarely trusted ordinary people. To Vivienne, strangers were risks. Men with complicated histories were threats. People who appeared too kind were usually hiding something. So when she saw a rugged single father named Callum Reed working as a maintenance contractor at a community rehabilitation center, she barely noticed him. Callum was the opposite of everything Vivienne expected from a man. He drove an old pickup truck, wore faded work clothes, and spent most of his free time caring for his 9-year-old son, Archie. He never complained about money, although money was often scarce. He repaired equipment, fixed broken ramps, volunteered at children's programs, and quietly donated whatever he could spare to families who were struggling. What nobody in the rehabilitation center knew was that Callum had once served in the United States Navy as a highly trained SEAL. Years earlier, he had left the military after an operation that had cost him close friends and left him emotionally exhausted. He never talked about his service because he did not want admiration. He wanted an ordinary life. He wanted to be a father. He wanted his son to grow up knowing him as the man who packed lunches, fixed bicycles, and showed up when life became difficult. Callum had learned something during his years in the military that he carried into civilian life. Strength was not about being the loudest person in the room. Real strength was staying calm when everyone else panicked, helping without demanding recognition, and protecting people who could not protect themselves. That was why he volunteered at the rehabilitation center. He knew what it meant to feel broken. He also knew that people often recovered only after someone reminded them they were not finished. One bright afternoon, Vivienne brought Elara to the center for a private therapy session. Elara was frustrated and withdrawn. She had refused several exercises that morning, and Vivienne had already spent hours trying to encourage her. As they entered the large outdoor rehabilitation garden, Elara noticed Callum helping Archie repair a small wooden obstacle course. Callum did not stare at her wheelchair. He did not offer pity. He simply smiled when Elara looked his way and continued helping his son. Something about that made Elara curious. Over the next few weeks, Callum became a familiar presence. He never treated Elara like a fragile child. When she struggled to reach a flower growing beside the walkway, he did not immediately hand it to her. Instead, he moved the flower pot closer and let her decide what to do. When she complained about an exercise, he did not tell her she was brave. He simply reminded her that progress did not have to look impressive to matter. Elara began spending more time outside her wheelchair. She started asking questions. She laughed with Archie. For the first time in years, Vivienne noticed her daughter behaving like an ordinary child instead of a patient. But Vivienne became suspicious. She discovered that Callum had a military background, although the records available to her were incomplete. She ordered her security team to investigate him. What they found was not a criminal history, but a sealed military record and years of service that raised more questions than answers. Vivienne immediately decided that Callum had been hiding something dangerous. Her fear reached its peak during a charity event held at the rehabilitation center. Wealthy donors, doctors, athletes, and business leaders gathered during the afternoon to raise money for children with disabilities. Elara sat beside her mother near the main garden while Callum helped staff organize equipment. Suddenly, a heavy lighting structure became unstable above the crowd. One of the support cables snapped, sending the metal frame crashing toward a group of children. Before anyone could react, Callum moved. He sprinted across the courtyard, shoved two children out of the falling structure's path, caught a collapsing section with his shoulder long enough for another staff member to pull the children away, and then rolled clear seconds before the frame smashed into the ground. The crowd erupted in panic. Vivienne stared at him. Callum immediately checked the children instead of checking himself. His movements were precise, controlled, almost impossibly calm. That was when Vivienne understood that the man she had investigated was not simply an ordinary contractor. But before she could confront him, Elara did something that stunned everyone. She stood. At first, Vivienne thought her daughter had simply shifted in her chair. Then Elara straightened her legs. Her hands trembled. Her face tightened with effort. The crowd gradually became silent as she released her grip on the wheelchair. She took one step. Then another. Vivienne's heart nearly stopped. Elara had spent 6 years being told to celebrate tiny movements, yet now she was standing completely on her own. Then she saw Callum. Something inside the girl changed. Perhaps it was the memory of every moment he had treated her like a child instead of a patient. Perhaps it was the confidence he had quietly given her without realizing it. Whatever the reason, Elara suddenly began moving toward him. 1 step became 3. 3 became 6. Then she ran. Vivienne could not believe her eyes. Her daughter, the child she had carried through hospitals, surgeries, therapy sessions, and years of disappointment, was running across the garden. Elara threw herself into Callum's arms. He caught her carefully, overwhelmed by emotion, while the entire courtyard stood frozen. Vivienne began crying. Not the controlled tears of a powerful woman accustomed to private grief, but the helpless tears of a mother who had just witnessed the impossible. Then suspicion returned. Vivienne demanded to know who Callum really was. Callum finally admitted the truth. He had served as a Navy SEAL and had participated in missions that required him to rescue wounded teammates under impossible conditions. He had never told Vivienne because he was not looking for work that required his military identity. He wanted to build a peaceful life for Archie. The rehabilitation center was simply a place where he could use his skills to help people. Vivienne asked whether he had intentionally worked with Elara because he knew who she was. Callum shook his head. He had not known she was a billionaire's daughter. He had not cared about her mother's wealth. He had simply seen a little girl who had stopped believing in herself. That answer broke something inside Vivienne. For years, she had surrounded Elara with people who had been paid to help her. Callum was the first person who had helped without expecting anything in return. But the greatest revelation came when Archie quietly approached his father and handed him an old photograph. It showed Callum carrying a wounded soldier during his final military operation. The soldier was Elara's father's closest friend, a man who had later told Vivienne that her husband had died because rescuers had arrived too late. Callum revealed that he had been there that day. He had tried to save Elara's father. He had failed. Vivienne was stunned. The man she had blamed for abandoning her family had actually died years earlier while trying to return to them, and Callum had been one of the men who carried him from the battlefield. For the first time, Vivienne understood that she had built an entire life around a story that was not true. Her husband had not simply walked away. He had been killed while serving his country. Callum had carried the truth for years because he had never wanted to reopen Vivienne's wounds. Vivienne broke down, overwhelmed by grief for the husband she had mourned incorrectly and gratitude toward the stranger who had unknowingly helped her daughter find hope. But Callum did not want money. Vivienne offered him a position, financial security, a house, and anything else he needed for Archie. Callum refused the fortune. He told her through his actions that helping someone did not create a debt. That refusal changed Vivienne more than anything else. She began visiting the rehabilitation center without her security entourage. She sat with families who could not afford private treatment. She listened to parents who were terrified about their children's futures. She discovered that her wealth had allowed her to build walls around herself, but those walls had also separated her from the very people she could help. Months passed, and Elara continued walking. She did not recover overnight, and Callum never allowed anyone to call her progress a miracle that erased her struggles. Some days she needed the wheelchair. Some days she used braces. Some days she fell. But she no longer believed that falling meant failure. Archie became her closest friend, and Callum became someone Vivienne slowly learned to trust. The billionaire who once believed she had to control everything began funding rehabilitation programs for children from ordinary families. She established grants for single parents. She rebuilt the center where Callum volunteered and insisted that his name never appear on the building because he did not want recognition. Years later, Elara stood on a stage at the opening of a new children's rehabilitation facility. She walked to the microphone without assistance. Vivienne watched from the front row with tears in her eyes. Callum stood at the back beside Archie, trying unsuccessfully to hide how proud he was. Elara spoke about the people who had helped her believe in herself. She thanked her mother for never giving up. She thanked the doctors who kept trying. Then she thanked the single father who had never once treated her like she was broken. Callum lowered his head as the audience applauded. Vivienne looked at him and realized that the greatest gift he had given her family was not money, fame, or even the impossible moment when her daughter ran. He had reminded them that people do not need to be rescued from every hardship. Sometimes they simply need someone willing to stand beside them while they learn how to rise. And perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all. A billionaire mother learned that love could not control the future. A little girl learned that her wheelchair did not define her. A single father learned that the scars he carried from his military past could become a source of strength instead of shame. And a family that had once been shattered by grief discovered that healing sometimes begins with a stranger who asks for nothing in return. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Before you go, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe was the greatest lesson in Elara's story. Was it her courage, her mother's transformation, Callum's kindness, or the power of never giving up? Because sometimes the person who changes our life is not the richest, the most powerful, or the most celebrated person in the room. Sometimes it is simply the person who sees our weakness, refuses to pity us, and quietly reminds us that we can still rise. And sometimes, when we finally take that first step, we discover that someone has been standing there all along, ready to catch us.